Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for STEM professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about the platform, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Jay Miller's story is an interesting one. After dropping out of college and giving up on a career as a musician, he joined the military as a data network technician. After leaving the military, he became a system administrator and developed a love for productivity. He now uses his knowledge of productivity and development concepts and his military training to help developers improve their productivity. Productive Developers is the company he founded to do just that. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Jay.
It's good to be here. Thank you for letting me jump on the mic and tell my story.
You got it. Thank you. First question. So I mentioned in the intro that you dropped out of college. What was your reason for doing that?
Immaturity, wanting to be an adult way too fast. I'm about to be a father soon. So in my mind, I have like all of the right parental answers. But if I were honest, I wanted to be an adult. I felt a lot like the stuff that I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to work in the tech space. But of course, that freshman, sophomore year, you're taking, political science, literature. You're taking all the classes that have nothing to do with what you want to do. So in my mind, I was just too impatient and said, hey, you know what? I could probably go get the experience elsewhere and not really need a degree to make that happen.
Okay. What were you studying in college?
I originally went in for computer engineering with a focus on hardware design. But I learned quickly that was not going to be something that I was interested in and went more towards like a computer science, emphasis on programming route.
Oh, okay. Actually, I don't even know the difference, but so I'm just curious. What's the difference between computer engineering and computer science?
So the computer engineering side is applying the knowledge of what's happening on the screen and behind the scenes, and taking it down, at least in my discipline that I was studying, down to like the hardware layer. So getting down to like assembly level stuff and saying, how do you make ones and zeros happen before you start looking at writing programs to actually do things with those ones and zeros?
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I did a computer engineering course. I think, it was my first semester. Yeah, first semester, freshman year. And that was hard. I'd never done any kind of programming before. I think we were using C, C or C++. I don't remember which one it was, but I sucked. It was horrible. I was so glad when that class was over, and I was studying materials engineering, so that computer class was the only one I ever had to take. So I was glad when that shit was over,
man. There was definitely a lot of electrical components to it that. A lot of it was I know about this stuff, and I was kind of a science nerd in high school. I had taken chemistry, I had taken physics, so I think I was more interested in the science behind the engineering, not necessarily the engineering itself. And I think that scientific method is what really gave me this approach towards programming and later on coaching and productivity that I have today.
Interesting. Well, I also mentioned in the intro that you once aspired to be a musician. So where did that come from? And are there any kind of parallels between your job and music?
Parallels, I don't think too much, except for everyone in our department really loves music, and everyone on the team. I use a lot of musical references, and I still play bass to this day, just for a local church, but one of the things that I grew up around was musicians. My uncle is actually a award-winning musician in the Detroit area. He has some property that is connected with Motown, which is kind of cool. But ever since I was, a kid, my grandmother played piano. My dad played trumpet and bass, and I played electric guitar and later on bass. And I knew some music theory, and my uncle, just anything he touched, he could figure out eventually. So there were all of these musical inspirations around me. And of course, being that teenager growing up in the early 2000s, I wanted to do it my way. And I got into like the Southern style, like jam band era, listening to Derek Trucks, for people who know who that is, and Government Mule, and these long, like, instrument driven songs. And I just loved them. And I loved, listening to BB King, and, being able to almost attach a persona to an instrument or to a sound. And I really wanted to create that in my own music. However, like, life happens, and honestly, a lot of bands are out there. A lot of bands are better than the bands that you hear about. And I always love talking music with people and finding those bands. And, unfortunately, not everyone gets signed. Not everyone goes and, shows up on MTV or whatever the big thing is. And it's kind of cool. I wish I would have been a musician in today's age, because it seems like you have a better shot of doing it kind of independently. But ultimately, I had to pay the bills, and I had to come up with a plan. And since I had this IT thing in my back pocket, it seemed like the safer pick.
Interesting. Okay, well, college, that didn't work out. The career as a musician, that didn't work out. So now you decide to enlist in the military. What branch were you in?
I was in the United States Marine Corps for 5 years.
Okay, the Marine Corps. And what made you decide to enlist?
Well, you mentioned it already. College not working out, band not working out, and I actually hit a really low point in my life where I was homeless for a while and had to come up with a plan. One of the things that I had told my mother, I was, like I said, always independent. I moved out when I was 17, and I told my mom, when I move out, I'm not coming back. I'm going to make it. And to much of my hard-headedness, I did. And one of the things that I mentioned was I'm not going to join the military ever unless I don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And, it got to that point. And then a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to call your bluff. And I enlisted and gained the skills that I still use today.
Interesting. And I mentioned you were a data network technician. So what is that exactly is that job?
So a data network technician, they've changed the name 1,000 times. I think at the time it was like a data network specialist. They're basically the system administrators of the Marine Corps. If you're not familiar with the way the military is structured, there are contractors that come in and kind of do a lot of high level work for the military branches, but then you have the administrators who are doing the on the ground in person administration. And that was my job. I would go to foreign countries all over the world, and we would get out in tents and set up these networks. And I would go on ships and build networks on ships and sit there and have to stand up a help desk. And when there were problems, troubleshoot for days on end and lead teams, in not in any combat zones, luckily, but in some disaster relief areas where, the communications that we set up and established helped to make sure that, people on the ground got food and that people were able to function properly out on their missions. So it was, like I said, we were kind of the IT of the Marine Corps for our units, but, it was super rewarding.
Interesting. Where did you get stationed?
I spent my first 3 years of the service, my first year in training and all of that in California, in Parris Island, South Carolina. And then I got stationed for 3 years in Okinawa, Japan, where I deployed a lot. I tell people for the 3 years that I was stationed in Japan, I only spent about 6 to 7 months there. I spent a lot of time out on the ocean. 2.5 years to be exact, but I got to visit, mainland Japan, Thailand, the Philippines several times, Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, Indonesia, Australia, a lot of different places. And everywhere we went, like, that was our job. Hey, set up a network, train foreign militaries to do what we do, and train the people that were going to replace us eventually to lead and teach the next generation of network specialists that would come in.
Okay, well, that does sound like a pretty cool job, and I guess you did that for the 5 years. And as you know, here in San Diego, there's a pretty large military presence here, and so a lot of people, once they get out, they got to readjust to civilian life. What was your adjustment back to civilian life? Was it seamless, or were there difficulties?
It was a little challenging. That's actually where the whole fascination with productivity came into play. I was able to secure a job before I got out of the military, which was great. And I would tell anybody that's in that transition process, definitely try to have a plan before, your last days in the service. It helps a lot. It takes a lot of stress off. But at the same time, going back to not having to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and work out. Now you have to, get yourself up early and try to stick to a diet and exercise regimen. And on top of that, the best thing about the military and the reason I chose it was the only job that I knew I could get where I couldn't be fired. Like,
all right.
Like, hey, I could be the worst Marine ever. As long as I don't break the law, they can't fire me.
Right.
So there was a lot of safety in that. Once I got back to the civilian, life, that idea of being fired was always a constant fear. And it wasn't due to lack of knowledge or lack of effort. It was just always that idea of, was I doing enough? Was I being good enough to be able to excel in this position? And that's where the ideas of imposter syndrome kick in. And, if you feel like you're stressed out because you got a lot of stuff on your plate and you're dropping stuff all over the place and you're not getting things done and, it's not looking good for you. There was a time where I thought I was going to be fired, and had it not been for my determination to buckle down, get productive, and really start to focus on what I was doing, I don't know where I'd be today,
Yeah, I agree with you, but I guess to piggyback off your point of there being no kind of job security in civilian life, sometimes it has nothing to do with you whether you're productive or not. I mean, if the company has a couple or one or two bad quarters, they could have a massive layoff, and you lose your job. You could have been the best at your job, but it wouldn't have mattered if the company's not doing well. They got to cut. They got to cut people at some point. And so there's always that, but I guess you're right. When you're in the military, there is no cut. As long as
exactly. Like, they might cut numbers and they might kick you out of the service, but I mean, you're not going to get fired. You're going to get an honorable discharge. And
right.
Life. They always say you get the perks of being a veteran after that, and it's like I haven't figured out what all those perks are yet, but I'm slowly learning. I still get a discount every now and then. That's kind of cool.
Right.
But,
right.
But yeah, like you said, the civilian life, you could be doing everything right and still just be the bottom man on the totem pole and get laid off. One of the things that I did do is the job that I selected, I strategically looked for a job that had a large tenure and, a large tenuring rate. The job that I was at, they employed people for, I think they said after you make it after the first 3 years, on average, you're there for at least another 15 to 20. So it was definitely trying to align myself in a position to where I knew as long as I was doing my job, the odds of being laid off were slim to none.
Okay, well, I mean, if you can work the odds in your favor, that's definitely something you should do. Well, you mentioned that your background in the military is what really got you interested, and making your transition into civilian life is what really brought you to be more interested in productivity. So when you say productivity, what exactly does that mean?
See, this is where we're going to start nerding out. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I'm not productive. Oh, my productivity levels are low. In my opinion, productivity is defined as a very simple thing. Are you getting the things done that need to be done? It's cut and dry. A lot of people are like, they assign peace of mind to it and a lot of other things. It's at the end of the day, do you feel like you accomplished everything that you set out to accomplish? If not, then you're not hitting the mark. And that is something that, I've struggled with before. I've been successful with before. I tell people, like, just because I coach people on how to be productive does not mean that I always listen to myself and that I'm productive 100% of the time. It's always funny. Like, when I talk to other productivity coaches, I'm like, hey, how's it been? And a lot of us have gotten to the, we'll say productive as a way of saying it's been super busy. Like, and then we often talk about the practice of not being busy. So it's like, hey, sometimes it's a do as we say, not as how we look like we're doing.
Okay, I get it. I get it. So, I mean, you mentioned, that your definition of productivity is, are you getting done what you need to be getting done? Is there a piece to that where, some people, they have things to get done, but perhaps they overburden themselves. They give themselves too much to get done in the space that they have to do it. And so then if someone does that, are they still productive, or are they do they need to adjust their expectations of themselves?
It's funny. I was just talking with one of our community members about this earlier today. Usually the people that feel like they are the most unproductive are putting too much on themselves.
Right.
And you get into this habit of like, well, my boss says I got to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I'm looking at this long list of stuff, and I'm constantly looking at this stuff, and I'm not able to get it all done. And I'm sweating and I'm sweating and I'm sweating. And it's like, well, wait a minute, there's only 24 hours in the day. You're only expected to work 8 of those, and you still got to go home. If you've got a family, you got the responsibilities to them. You got your responsibilities to your personal health. You got to make sure that you got enough sleep so that the next day you can continue at the pace that you were going. A lot of the ideas of productivity have just been this metric of how many tasks am I completing, or how many points have I gotten in our daily scrum or our weekly scrum, or what any sprint that you're doing.
Right.
And this is where productivity is kind of that pseudoscience. Some people are going to define it like this, some people are going to define it like that. And I do think by doing that, we don't set a clear enough standard to what that means. And you do run into the case where people then decide, I'm going to put more on myself than I necessarily need to. And if I fail because I've done so, that makes me unproductive, which in a way that's true, but not in the way that they're thinking. You're not unproductive because you didn't get those things done. You're unproductive because your stress levels are high, which causes you to not sleep well, which causes you to have bad diet and exercise routines, which causes your stress levels to go up even higher, which causes some serious health problems down the road. And it could all be, alleviated by just saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm taking on a bit too much. Let's see if we can dial it back a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I know for myself, I have a difficulty saying no. And a lot of times, even back when I used to work in corporate America, if somebody asked me to do something, I assumed that they knew that I had the time to do it. And I assumed that, at least I assumed to myself, well, if they're asking me to do it, that means I can do it. So I would always say, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll do it. But then, I load myself up with all this stuff, and then, perhaps you don't do everything as well as you want to do it. So things kind of get half-assed, as opposed to if, you've had fewer tasks to do, you could do them, more, you could do them better, as opposed to a whole bunch of tasks, which you don't do all that well.
Yeah, there's definitely this theory that if I have to tell my boss no, that's going to run the risk of me getting fired, which I've actually learned that it's quite the opposite. If you're the yes person, if you're the person that always says yes, and you're not doing a good job because you're not choosing your battles, then that will often lead to you having poorer performance, where if you decline and you say, hey, you know what, sir, ma'am, I can't take this on right now, and here's why. And just let them know, hey, the plate's a little full. Maybe they can take some stuff off your plate and allow you to really do the job that they expect you to do, but do it at the level that they also expect you to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I guess, a part of a boss's job is, you have all these tasks, but they're supposed to help you in the prioritization of those tasks, which are the ones that are, the most important to get done, and which are the ones that, aren't as important, as definitely, key in having, I guess, a good relationship with a boss. So, I mentioned in the intro that you started a company, Productive Developers, but before that, you had something called Productivity in Tech. What was that, and why did you make the transition to Productive Developers?
So, again, with this fascination with productivity, I wanted to share it with anyone that was willing to listen. And at the time of getting out of the military, I hadn't started jumping into programming yet, but I knew it was something that I wanted to do. So I jumped into a couple of communities. One of them, I'll always give a big shout out to this community because without them, I wouldn't be a developer today. And that's Code Newbie. At the time of recording this, they're actually about to have their second CodeLand conference. So a big shout out to the team there and all the great things they're doing. But I really wanted to emulate that feeling of, hey, it was a community-driven effort that got me to the level that I'm at as a programmer and as a developer. What if I did the same thing for productivity? So then I started the Productivity in Tech community, and it's had many different iterations of what it's looked like over the years. It was a Facebook group. It still is a Slack channel to this day. Now it's just the Productive Developer Slack channel. And then, of course, there was a podcast that went along with it, and that ran for 2 years and some change. And ultimately, it was my idea of bringing in and learning from the people that are doing. That's something that a lot of coaches are coaches. They can teach you how to be a productive coach. I believe that you best learn from the people that are doing the things that you are doing. You know, if you look at that military experience that I had, like I said, one of my key roles when I became a non-commissioned officer was, great, you have to train the people that are going to get promoted to where you are now.
Right.
So I was teaching people the things that I was learning. It was basically learn it the next year, teach it. Learn it the next year, teach it. Learn it the next year, teach it. And then, you know, the first deployment that I go on, I'm all confused and don't know what's going on. I did a total of 7 deployments in 2.5 years, and 7 cruises. By the 7th one, I knew people on a first name basis, and knew about families, and I knew the ins and outs of the ship that we were on and where you could go, where you couldn't go, and seen all kinds of crazy things and learned a bunch of different stuff about the technology that was there as well. So why not impart that knowledge onto the future generation of leaders in the Marine Corps? Same thing with productivity in tech. There are a bunch of people out here that do things that are extremely productive. They know, they don't even realize it. And it's like, hey, if I can get these people together and just start talking about how they're doing things, that they'll be able to learn from each other and help each other out and help each other be more productive. And I cut the productive part a lot in that. I just say be more, whatever it is you want to be, but utilize that community-driven aspect to it. And that's really what productivity in tech was all about. I can't remember, did you ask why it changed to productive developers?
Yeah, I was curious as to why there was that transition.
So the transition came in once I learned that there's a limit to what you can do out of just good graces. There's always something in the background that needs to keep moving. And for me, it's a family. It's a wife and soon to be our first daughter. And, I have a day job. I have a mortgage, and the decision to say, hey, you know what? I need to go out and teach people not just what I'm learning from all of these amazing people in the community, but the things that I've learned in my experiences. And one of the offerings that we had in the productivity and tech community was every month you got a 1-hour phone call with me if you chose to take it. And we'd sit down and we just talk about what you were doing, and we'd make suggestions. And I sat down and interviewed for the podcast a lady by the name of Stephanie Hurlbert. And a lot of people know her on Twitter. She's a really, really cool CEO for a company that does image processing up in the Washington area.
Okay.
And once we talked, she said, you've helped all these people. You've built this community. You have thousands of people who you are constantly bringing help to. Why are you not getting paid to do this? And I said, you know what? Let's really look at that. Let's examine it. And sat down with my wife, and I have my personal faith, so I prayed about it. And
wait, hold on. You said the people in the group got an hour to speak with you. How many people are we talking?
I mean, it varied. At times, I think for the most part, I only had maybe 10 or 15 people that would actually take me up on the offer.
Whoa, 10 to 15? You weren't charging any of them?
Exactly. Well, we were. See, there you go. See, this is
better than
the exact conversation. and they were paying to be members of the community. But I mean, when you think about it, how much does a coaching call cost? I'm not going to give my rates out right now, but I'll just say I was charging almost a tenth of to be a member of the community as what a coach would cost you, per hour. And they were like, yeah, no, like, just for our sake, don't do that.
Your wife didn't say nothing?
Well, again, I had the full-time job. So, for her, it was like, hey, Bill's getting paid. That's all I'm happy about. And she's like, I wish you would spend more time with us. So, like I said, going back to that idea of productivity, am I doing the things that I need to be doing? Am I completing the tasks that I set out to complete? And as a husband, I think I was missing the mark. So in an effort to be more productive, I actually opened up the community, made it free again. I took away that hour phone call and said, hey, you know what? Continue to learn from each other. But I have the years of military leadership training. I have the years of just the personal passion of being more productive. And I have the network of other professional coaches, productivity, developers, consultants. And I have the developer background, which means that when when you're explaining to me why you can't check email only once a day because, you run a help desk and that's just not going to work, I understand because I've been in that position. Right. So I'm coming from a position of where I can relate to the issues that you're having because I've often had them in my own experiences, but I can also impart the wisdom that I've learned, not just through my own experiences, because that'll be very finite, but also from the people that I've interviewed, the people that I've just had casual conversations with, the people I've spoken to at conferences, the other podcasters that are out there, the other developers that are out there. And on top of that, the people that I sit down with and talk with every single day in the productive developer community.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so here's something. So say somebody, they're having productivity issues. They come to productive developers and they want you to help them. So how do you help them? Out of curiosity, so what kind of issues do people come to you with, and what kind of solutions do you offer them?
It's been a plethora, and one of the things that I will say is I know what I can and I can't fix. As I'm from the South, and we have a lot of sayings, and one of my favorite sayings was from my mom, and she said, you know what, sometimes you can't fix stupid, and you can't fix laziness. Right. These are things that, when I can spot them immediately just because, again, coming from experience, we program out of laziness. A lot of us are developers because we're like, hey, I don't want to have to do this 1,000 times. Let me write code that'll do it for me. And that's great. The thing is, when we got stuff that needs to get done and we're like, I just don't want to do it, that's a problem. But some of the things I often hear are, I'm spending too much time at work and not enough time at home with my family. I'm spending too much time with my family and not enough time at work. I do get that occasionally. Wow. But oftentimes, and I've mentioned this on the podcast originally, I said, people out there know what they've got to do, and sometimes they just need kind of that affirmation. They need that person to say, yeah, you're right. But then are you familiar with the Pareto principle?
That's the 80-20 rule?
Exactly. I feel like most people are 80% of the way there. Like, they know how they work. They know how they best communicate. They know how not to get them to do something and how to get them to do something. What they don't know is how to put all that together in a pretty little bow in a package and say, this is my productive mentality, my productive style. Right. Some people say, hey, I know everything that I got to do, but I just keep it all in my head, and that's how I've worked for years. And I tell them, okay, but if that's the case, what happens when you forget? Or even worse, what happens when you're on vacation and your coworker needs something out of your head? Now they're calling you while you're trying to sit on the beach and relax, and you can't. And meanwhile, your wife's mad at you because you're supposed to be on vacation and not working. Right. And these are the things that we tend to get into. And I often tell people, like, I would love to sit down and have someone pay me to have a casual conversation with them. Unfortunately, we are past that
Right.
because you wouldn't be paying me if you didn't think there was a problem. So I tend to help people get that extra 20% of the way there. And if they don't know where to start, I help them identify what that 80% is, and then we work on the following 20.
Okay. Well, do you help developers specifically, or do you help anybody with productivity issues?
Well, I'll say I'm always down to help someone. If you just want to talk, I've always believed in give a little or give a lot, ask for a little. There we go. I can't see again. I'm not the best with remembering things. That's why productivity is important.
Right.
Um, but I'm always willing to give advice and help. I just can't always promise I'm available, and that's the thing with coaching. If someone calls me every single week and says, "Hey, I'm having a problem," I might be able to help them one day, but then the next day it's hey, I can't do it. Right now I'm busy. I've got clients that I'm working with. But when someone says, "Hey, I want you to be a client," what you're getting is me focused on you, me concerned 100% at that moment about what it is that's going on in your life and whatever the situation is. And again, I'd be open to coaching anyone because I don't believe the things that I teach are limited to developers. But again, having that experience as someone who has been in the tech space for, going on close to like 13, 14 years now.
Okay.
I've been there. I've done that. I've got the scars from Marine Corps life and the emotional scars from corporate life to prove it. So it's easier to relate to the developer, which is why I like to present my package to, the productivity coaching, mentality to developers because it's from a perspective of another developer.
Oh yeah, that definitely helps. I'm sure it helps with with credibility when you're talking to developers because you know what they're going through, and so they're probably be more likely to listen. One question I have: so when someone becomes a client, what are they? Do they sign up for a certain number of calls with you, or do they pay by the call, or how does that work?
So we got a couple of different options. One of the things that I tell people is just like any type of project, there needs to be a definitive start and a definitive end. I don't want to be on the hook for something I don't know when it's going to end.
Right.
Only thing I'm worried about that was as a parent and as a husband. Like those are the only two things that kind of have an indefinite ending to them.
Right.
At some point, I would like to retire, so there's a definitive end point there.
Right.
So I always try to keep the end in mind. And I just say, hey, what is the goal? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And just like, if you've worked with Agile, if you've worked with Scrum, you evaluate it and you associate that value to a certain time projection. So someone might come in and say, hey, I'm just having a hard time focusing on this particular project. And say, okay, well, then in that case, we'll start today, tomorrow, whenever you want to start, and we'll end at the end of the project, because at that point I'm no longer needed if I'm just helping you with this project or focusing on this project. But if someone says my goal is just to get more productive or be more productive, then we say, okay, let's look at what's going on. So we do a free assessment call where I sit down. Again, I like giving a little bit. So, we'll do a free phone call. It usually lasts about 15, 20 minutes. And I just take it all in. I say, all right, here's your time. You can vent. What happens in that phone call stays between me and that person.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me everything, and then I say, all right, now here's my rates. Based on what you've told me, I think it's going to take 4 or 5 sessions. 5 sessions. So we'll do a 5-session, thing, or hey, you know what? I think you've got some ongoing things. And I tell people, if I can't give you an exact date, I'm gonna recommend that you go see a psychiatrist, because at that point you've got some stuff that I can't help.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I mean, realistically, like if there's just so much going on that I don't think that we can implement a few things that will just make life easier or make life a little bit more productive, there's a lot of stuff that's way above me. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be anybody's therapist. I'm not there to be their therapist. I'm there to be their accountability partner and that person that can give them that little extra whatever it is they need to get to where they're trying to get to.
Interesting. Okay. Well, for the clients that you have, do they tend to be one-offs or do you get repeat customers?
A lot of them, and again, we're just starting out, so we're trying to we're learning, but a lot of
Okay.
them are actually community members, and that's the thing is people who have figured out that there's value in continuing. I don't have to continuously help them. They're going to the community for that. It's
Mhm.
when they have that problem that maybe no one in the community has dealt with, or maybe it's gonna require a little bit more than someone writing you a message in Slack. That's when they come in, and I tell people a lot of them are singular sessions where they just go,
Oh,
"Hey, I've got a very specific problem that I'm dealing with that I need some help on. Do you mind taking a look at it and helping me figure it out?" And let's go, sure. And then, I do my research. I look at the situation. I ask a thousand questions. And then at the end, we say, hey, this is, this is the plan. And we
okay.
just go from there. But I mean, a lot of these issues can be solved in a single session, which is usually about an hour to 2 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay, that long. 2 hours. 2 hours on the phone. Wow, that's a long
Well,
time.
a lot of it is like we talk. Like I said, we talk for that 15 minutes. I go home. I do about an hour's worth of connecting stuff and drawing lines and making mind maps and notebook, sketches and drawings and all that fun stuff. And then I come on the phone looking all prophetic and just say like a couple of words, and they go, "How come I didn't think of that?" And I go, "Well, you did. I just made sense of it."
Nice, nice. A question. Oh, boy, I just had a question. It's escaping me now. Oh man, what was it? Oh yeah. So during these consultation calls that you initially have, is there ever an instance where somebody gives you an issue that you're not exactly sure how to deal with it, but you think you can figure it out?
Oh,
And
all the time, and that's where being a programmer is fun, because as like I said, I had that passion for science. You have that scientific method, so I kind of have like a theory, and then just as a programmer, I do the same things I do with code. I have a very specific problem. I don't quite know how to answer it. So what do? You do research. You go to the productivity stack overflow, if you will, and from there you start looking at, okay, what have other people done in similar situations to this, and how does their situation compare to the situation that I'm looking at right there. And I just start looking and I say, hey, this seems like this might work, or hey, this looks about right, but it's a little off because of X, Y, and Z. Well, let's analyze X, Y, and Z. If we can solve that problem, then we can take this solution that was over here and apply that here. And then once we do that, we test it. We see if it works. If it does work, then awesome. If it doesn't work, then back to the drawing board. And in a lot of those times, like you said, applying tests, if you know anything about test-driven development, you write the test first, and then you write the code that passes the test. So for instance, if someone says, I'm having a hard time sleeping,
mhm.
and I have a few solutions to that. I can say, okay, well, what can we test? We can't test buy a new mattress. At least you don't want to test that up front. That's probably your last resort,
Right,
because not everybody's got mattress money. We just bought a mattress. Trust me, not everybody has mattress money.
right.
So, but what we can test are, what are you eating? We can test, what are your sleeping habits? What time are you going to bed? What time are you waking up? What are you doing before you go to sleep? What are you doing, when you wake up in the morning? How much caffeine are you ingesting during the day? We can test all of those things. What's changed in the last, since you started having these problems? And we can say, okay, let's isolate a single thing and see if that works. If it doesn't work, well, then let's move on to the next thing. If that doesn't work, let's move on to the next thing. If we've looked at all of these things and you're still having problems sleeping, well, then sorry, a duck is a duck and you got to buy a new mattress. you know?
Right, right, right. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know regarding the things that you're working on?
No, just check out productivedevelopers.com, and we got a new site up, and I'm trying to write. I can't promise I'm going to write every day, every week, but we're going to write regularly in there, and you can join the community for free. And that's the one thing that I want to tell people is not everybody needs to be a client. Again, I think that there are a lot of people out there that are very, very bright, very, very intelligent, and they can learn from one another. where I come in is after you've learned from one another and for some reason it's just not clicking. That's when I need to come in. And I still want to foster that community. But again, if you need help, let me know. And if your team needs help, we also do team workshops and team, consulting and coaching. And that includes an individual session as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing all of this, Jay. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure, the people listening appreciate it too. This has been quite an education.
Well, I'm just glad I was able to jump on and connect with you. I know you sent me an email a while back, and I've been wanting to connect. And when you told me about this, I was like, let's do it. I'm gung ho for it.
Excellent. Once again, everybody, my name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for STEM professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about the platform, please go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. It was great chatting with you, Jay.
Likewise. Take care.
All right.